Good evening, everyone. Tonight's program is on our 220 repeater system, its history, upgrades, and if you've been a ham in this area for any amount of time, you know that this month's presenter does not need an introduction. In technical discussions, just saying his name will elicit a nodding of everybody's heads, and that is interpreted as this guy really knows his stuff. And I can't help but agree that Greg Lundling, W9DHI, really does know his stuff. He has been integral in helping many clubs with their repeaters. And let's see. I lost my place in my notes. Sorry. He's a retired engineer specializing in two-way radio. And Greg says experimenting and building was his main focus of ham radio since he was a Boy Scout in Troop 61, W9BSO, back in the 1960s, and it still is today. So, Greg, you have the floor. Take it away.
Okay, good evening, everyone. And we're going to include a little bit of history on the 220 repeater. The club W9CQO/R repeater on 224.18 and 222.58 input. So that's how that is all going. In 1988, it was actually a joint function of WA9JMS, K9QLP, and myself. And it was originally using Hamtronics transmitter and receiver kits and a used Wacom duplexer at WA9GMS's home in the town of Cedarburg. You can tell the pictures from 1988 because it's pretty grainy and it was photocopied and it's what I had. And you really want to talk about history, look at that wall phone. Let me minimize this one thing that's in my way. In 1990, it was rebuilt and placed in service on a new tower I had built in Germantown. It consisted of a Midland 13509, and people back then, the 13509 in the 70s and 80s was one of the few 220 mobiles out there. It was crystal controlled. And I had a spare one, so I split it, and it had a separate receiver and transmitter board. So we split it up and made the repeater out of that. SCOM 5K controller was added eventually. In the beginning, it just had a small identifier. And we used the existing Wacom duplexer and the Helix polyphaser and Cushcraft T-pole antenna. Now, a T-pole, you can search all over the internet and you can't find any history of these, but you've all seen the open dipole arrays like the 2-meter repeater antenna we have today. It's like that, but instead of having an open dipole loop, it actually had just a little T-pole, just a little dipole, vertical, just a rod. And I had that and the polyphaser and everything, and I donated all of that. Dick K9CAN, now a silent key, he built that picture there with the case open is an interdigital receive filter. And that was used to improve the selectivity of the Midland receiver because, well, you know, sort of like a lot of those receivers back in the 70s and early 80s, they had the selectivity of a barn door wide open. Yeah, let's go to the next slide. And that receiver was less than ideal. Dick and I then took a used Motorola Mycore mobile receiver and modified it per some articles we found for 222 megahertz. Now, the selectivity of that receiver was so good, we didn't need the interdigital filter anymore, and that was no longer required. And an ARR preamp, a gas-fed preamp, was added, and that gave us good sensitivity. At the same time, that we added that 5K controller, we also, I think we upgraded to 10K, 7K controller, and we added an RCA 10-meter base station, which I also had in the warehouse that I just donated. And we added that to remote as a remote base on two different 10-meter FM frequencies, the calling frequency and then a frequency to move to for chatting. And that worked really good. That was a very good receiver out there in Germantown. In the early 2000s, I wasn't too active with the club. I was too busy with other things. The repeater was relocated or moved and co-located with the 9.7 repeater in Cedarburg. The tired Midland transmitter was replaced with the Kenwood mobile rig as an exciter to feed an amplifier. Somewhere along the line, the RCA rig was replaced with a GE radio for 10 meters. However, that radio could only operate on one frequency and didn't have QSY capability. In addition, the radio lacked some receive sensitivity per K9 QLP. Jim said he would often listen on a scanner, but transmit on the 220 link. The amalgamation of all of this equipment over the years and the modifications was problematic at times. And the repeater in the early 2000s through about 6 months ago was down more than up. And the following slides are going to show you some of the pictures of what this thing looked like. There you go. That's the front and the back of the interconnect panel. It's a copper ground plane panel. You can see some power wires through toroids. You can see some relays and power strips and switches and fuses and a little bit of labeling, but it was a real rat's nest. There's the whole rack. You can see the MyCore receiver at the top above that panel with the 7K controller below it. And then there was the 220 transmitter, the GE 6-meter base, and on the bottom shelf there is a Motorola Mobile that was used for the link to link up the 220 and the 2-meter repeaters. And here you can see wiring off the back of the controller and more of the wiring. A couple of years ago, all of a sudden we lost power and the repeater wasn't working. And we apparently didn't see this when it happened, but it acted like the amplifier was dead. So we bypassed the amplifier. If you look on the right picture up at the top, that's the burnt up positive power connection on the 23 amp power supply that was feeding the amplifier. The bottom one is the new connector that I put in. The wire that was stuck in there was like a 12-gauge stranded wire that was not tinned, didn't have any sort of connector on it, was just jammed in there haphazardly and screwed down. There's a screw in there that crimps on it. And so over the years, it started breaking up and less wire was being connected. And, you know, the smaller the gauge of wire, the higher the voltage drop, the more current drawn. And guess what? When you do that, you start creating heat. And it melted that. And finally, the wire melted. And that's why the amplifier quit. And the amplifier that was running is this TE system amplifier right there. It's a 130 watt amplifier that was added in 2004. It works great. And in 2014, the 14-foot Hustler 6 dB antenna was added on the side mounted on the tower. So what the new system has, still the same frequencies. We have a 10-meter FM remote base that has both 29.6 and 29.54 switchable. So you can be on the calling frequency on FM, 6-meter FM. And if you want to talk longer than a short QSO, you can switch it to 29.54. It also has the 146.97 repeater linking for the nets as usual. And there's a complete RF power metering and DC power metering on the rack. In July, Tom and I went to the board to approve spending $451 to buy a used ICOM 220 repeater. They don't make that repeater anymore, but they were originally around $1,600. However, the deal fell through as the seller never shipped and broke his promises, and he had this excuse, that excuse, and Tom's monies were refunded. Tom decided he would just appoint me as the chief repeater engineer and tasked me with designing and building a new 220 system. I did a lot of research, and I found a number of systems around the country that were buying these TYT TH9000D 220 mobiles. They're 55-watt mobile. They're all synthesized. They're software programmable. They're software tunable. You don't have to open it up to adjust anything. They were only $140 a piece, which is rather cheap. TYT is a pretty big Chinese commercial two-way radio company. So they make a lot of commercial stuff too. And there's somebody that makes these little DB9 kits that a little DB9 connector mounts on an access hole in the back of the radio and plugs into the input-output jack on the board. So real easy way to interconnect. And like I said, there's a number of 220 systems throughout this US using this configuration. So there's the two mobiles when I started mounting them on the plate. One is the transmitter, one's the receiver. The following pieces were donated or already owned. The club had already owned an SCOM 7330, which was the most recent SCOM controller. It's a 3-port controller. It does quite a bit more than like the 7K does on our 2-meter repeater. There's 2 Samlex SEC 1223 switching supplies, one the club owned and one Tom KC90NY donated. And there's also an SL11 10 amp switching supply I donated. The 14697 remote base link radio came from the W9DHI estate that he donated to the club. And here's the picture. There's our SCOM controller. And if you notice, the second picture is everything broken out from the DB9s and DB15s to barrier strips, and everything's labeled and dressed. All the termination wiring and labeling was done by N9ENR, Lauren, and Tom, KC90NY, our repeater VP. They did a beautiful job on that. And this was in addition to how they set up everything on 9.7. In addition, we added a Kenwood TK601 10-meter radio to use as a remote base. I donated that. The TE Systems amplifier we already had. The rack with slide-out shelves and drawers was donated to the ORC. We've had it for a few years. And the ARR P220 VDG, the gas FET preamplifier, we already owned and was on the old system. Also, we have metering, a remote watt meter panel to monitor amplifier forward and reverse power from the amp to the duplexer, and then a second sampler to monitor power from the duplexer to the antenna system. Now, Tom KC90NY built and donated all of this, all the Bird and Simpson meter products. All in all, that's a really big donation if you look and find out what those meters and the samplers and the plugins are. A voltmeter panel was also created with salvaged meters that were in the barn to monitor the power supplies running the system, the 3 supplies. And a special thanks to Chuck Curran, W9KR, for helping Tom KC90NY with punching the panels for the meters with his Greenleaf punches. We didn't want to buy 2 or 3 punches because they're about $200 to $300 a piece. So it was nice Chuck had them. And here's Chuck and Tom working on. You can see there Tom with the ratchet and gloves on because It takes some torquing to cut through that thick of a sheet of aluminum with a punch. But that's probably the only time you'll see Tom working. Here's the watt meter panel, the forward power out of the amp, and you'll see it's about 140 watts. There's no reverse power. And then the forward power to the antenna, you'll notice we're getting 100 watts out of the duplexer. And here's the voltmeter panel. And the reason why the repeater voltmeter reads a little low is the calibration resistors are wrong. I've got the right resistors now for that meter. I just have to put them in, but they all should be showing about 14.8 volts. Here's the completed system in the rack. Now you're going to see it. The watt meters, the voltmeters, the controller, the transmitter with the pink display, the receiver with the blue display, the 6 meter and the 10 meter and the 2 meter remotes. There's the duplexers. Above the duplexer going into the hard line, you can see the tap monitoring the voltage or the power to the antenna. And down on the shelf, you can see the forward and reverse sampler. Now, the features of this whole system is the reliability of the transmitter and receiver on 220. We did complete balanced audio quality throughout the links. I want to thank our treasurer and UNR. I always forget your call sign. Get those two mixed up. For coming with his service monitor, so we could have 2 service monitors that were calibrated, one to be transmitting to the receivers, and then the other one to monitor what's coming out of them to make sure we had everything balanced going in and out of the controller. We have frequency agility on the 10 meter remote base, the calling frequency and a QSI frequency. One of the nice things about the 7330 is it has a serial port on the back and can be programmed, uploaded, and downloaded to a laptop, in addition to being programmed over the air. We have visual indication of operation via a metering panel, and it's almost an identical setup to the 14697 repeater layout, cabinet-wise and everything. So we're trying to standardize so everything's easy to maintain. Right now, there are 3 people in charge of that have access to the repeater shack that are control op and emergency maintenance people. There's Tom, myself, and Jim K9QLP as access in case the 2 of us can't get up there and we just need somebody to do something, check something for us. So thank Jim for that. We added polyphaser lightning protection. There was no lightning protection on this repeater before, and it wasn't properly grounded. We now have everything grounded, the duplexer, the cabinets, the radios. We have all these barrier strips that break out from the controller and all the radios. They're all complete with labeling, so you never have to open up any of those DB15s or the DB25s or anything. All test points are available, and all of those drawers where all the radios are all slide out drawers, so you can pull them all the way out. You can work on them. You can hit all the test points, ease of maintenance. This is just a basic block diagram. This will be posted. It'll be on the Groups IO site or on the website. I'll put it one place or the other, just to give you an idea of the basic block diagram of the radio cabinet and here's the duplexer system and the antenna system. Now, just the cost from the repeaters fund, the 2 radios, including tax and everything, was $302. The interface cables for inside the radios was $48. So we spent a whole $351.18. Everything else was already owned by the club or donated. When we did the second version at the Germantown Tower in 1990, we spent almost twice that, $643. So you can see I'm not only trying to build something that's reliable and sounds good and works great, but trying to keep the costs down. And you might hear on the 220 repeater, it's been saying the time. And on net days, it announces there's once an hour, it announces Club Net tonight at 8 p.m. And on every second Wednesday, it announces at 1 minute after the hour, club meeting tonight at 7:30 p.m. Well, I replicated that. 9/7 is now saying that too. So the technical committee, basically, when I wrote this at this time, was myself and Tom. We are always looking for other technical people to join the technical committee. And there is an email address. If you want to join, or if you got questions or report of problems or difficulties, just email technical@ozakiradioclub.org. And I'm going to open the floor to any questions and hopefully give enough time so people can go out and have a beer after the meeting, after the business meeting and everything.
So you can get on the 220 to get on the net, on the 2-meter net? Explain the way you're linking just a little bit.
Okay. There. Well, on the 220 repeater, there's 2 remote bases. On the net nights, we energize the 2-meter remote base on the 220 repeater, which is basically transmit on 146.37, receives on 146.97, and links the 2-meter and the 220 repeaters together. We run the net every Tuesday night that way.
Okay, what was the link you talked about with 10 meters?
Same thing with 10 meters. Okay. With commands, you can bring up the 10 meter and link it, and you're receiving 29.6 FM, and you can go ahead and transmit on there. And if you are talking to somebody you don't want to talk quite a while, you can then QSY it to 29.54, so you don't tie up the national calling frequency.
And that was where you talked about a place to go to chat.
Right. And a couple months ago, we had a couple guys in California that were chatting back and forth, and I popped in, and it was like they were sitting next door. They sounded like they were on 220. There was no difference in the audio quality.
Okay, and thanks a lot for identifying that TYT radio. I was thinking, as you talked about doing this presentation,
it's
I was thinking about looking for a radio.
Well, look for it or a clone of it, but it's a discontinued radio.
Oh, okay. So you have to find a used one. Do they currently have?
You can find new ones yet.
Oh, okay.
They come under different names.
Well, I know that I think I'm right about the fact I think Bill HC9JV picked up one of their radios that I think includes 220. Bill, you'd have to correct me if I'm wrong there. But I didn't want an HT. I wanted a mobile radio, so I'll look around. But the model you suggest, I'll look for first.
Yeah, well, our club trustee picked up one that's a different name on it, but it's the same radio. So they're out there.
Okay. Well, thanks a lot. I don't want to hog up the question time, but interesting presentation, very enlightening. I really enjoyed what you did put together. Thank you.
Yeah, he bought the Retevis, which is the 9000D also. It's the same radio, but with a different name on it.
What name did you say?
Retevis, RETEVIS, RT 9000D.
Okay.
Amazon's got it on sale for $135.
Okay, thanks a lot. I appreciate that.
The TYT is still available.
Okay.
They're still selling it on Amazon too at $140. So
for some reason, I was also thinking that HRO had some TYT products. I don't know which ones. Yeah. I'll have to look at that for sure. Thanks though.
Okay. This is W9PEM, Paul. Just a question, since these radios are still available and so inexpensive, is the club planning on procuring some as spares?
Well, Tom bought one used at Dayton, I think it was. And I don't know, well, it wasn't Dayton. It was some other ham fest. He found one down in Illinois or Indiana or something. And I thought he was going to give it to the club, but I think he's keeping it for himself. But yeah, that's something, according to Gary, our treasurer, our discretional $500 a year worth of funds without asking the board. We've spent most of that this year, so I can't spend another $140 until January 1st to buy a spare. So it's Gary's fault. He's Mr. Tight on the money bags.
Hey, Gary.
Come on, Jim, don't you have a question?
Oh, Greg, you've done it all. Believe me. The only thing you forgot is the 25-foot mast for the original antenna, which is still out on your tower, along with 5K controller. I can't get in to get it.
You got a bolt cutters? And a pry bar? What you want, Paul?
Greg, there's another quick question. Is it documented somewhere how to bring up the 10-meter link and how to QSY?
No, it's not. That's the type of thing that if you want permission to use the 10-meter link, the 2-meter link remote base, we're keeping that to control ops only because that's for nets. But for the 10-meter, we'd like you to send a request to the technical committee. And then we can go through the do's and don'ts, and then we'll give you the codes. Or we may just write a code just for you. And that way, if we're not happy with you, we can cancel the code.
Greg, this is Pat W9DHI. What kind of coverage does the 220 system have?
Well, that's a good question. I don't know. We have people checking in from New Berlin, from Racine, from Pewaukee Way, Sussex. So it's not quite as much as the 2-meter because the antenna is side mounted and lower. But if you want more coverage, we can just swap and put the antenna on the top and put the 2-meter on the side.
Well, it sounds like it's pretty good coverage.
It does good.
Any other questions? If not, thank you very much, Greg. That was very informative. Excellent.